What if everything you thought you knew about one of America's most beloved TV empires was a lie? What if behind the smiles, the handshakes, and the wheeling and dealing of Pawn Stars was something darker, something chilling? In this episode, we uncover the hidden truth that brought down Rick Harrison's multi-million-dollar empire, and how a single forgotten watch led to a discovery more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Bodies buried beneath luxury, relics stained with blood, and secrets sealed behind polished display cases. This isn't just a scandal. It's a story that will make you question fame, trust, and the power of illusion. If you're ready to dive deep into the conspiracy that shook the nation, make sure to like this video and subscribe for updates you won't see anywhere else. The truth is here, and it starts now. It was his birthday, Sylvester Stallone, now in his 70s. He'd flown into Vegas for a few meetings, and on a whim decided to visit the gold and silver pawn shop, the crown jewel of Rick Harrison's empire, and a landmark thanks to the History Channel. Stallone had always been drawn to stories etched into old things. He had an eye for relics, especially watches. There was something about time, the way it passed, the way it could be held in a mechanism of gears and springs. A tall young employee with a sharp haircut and a glimmer of awe in his eyes approached quietly. "Mr. Stallone, would you be interested in seeing something special? Just came in this morning. No paperwork yet. Might be your style." Stallone was polite, even warm. "Sure, kid. Let's see it." The young man walked him to a back display case, unlocked it, and pulled out a small velvet tray. On it lay an old wristwatch. Leather strap cracked with age, casing scratched but sturdy. But what made Stallone freeze wasn't the watch's craftsmanship. It was the engraving on the back. "To JM, no matter where you are, time is ours. S." Stallone stared. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a watch that looked familiar. It was the exact watch he'd given to Jack Monroe, a war correspondent and close friend, for his 50th birthday. That was back in 1991. Jack disappeared in 1994 while working on a story in Eastern Europe. No remains, no answers. Officially presumed dead. No one knew about the inscription. The kid said something, but Stallone barely heard it. He nodded slowly, made a show of examining the watch a bit longer, then handed it back. "Mind if I get a photo? For memory's sake." The employee smiled, clearly honored. "Of course." Stallone pulled out his phone, snapped a quick shot of the watch, front and back, then asked, as casually as he could manage, "Who brought it in?" The kid hesitated. "A guy dropped off a box early this morning, left no name, said it was from a private estate. I don't think Rick has even seen it yet." Sylvester left the store 10 minutes later, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. He got into his rental SUV and parked 2 blocks away before pulling out his phone again. He zoomed in on the engraving. It was unmistakable. The watch had last been seen in Jack's apartment in Sarajevo, and now it was sitting in Rick Harrison's Las Vegas shop. He didn't call friends. He didn't alert the media. Instead, he sent the photo directly to an old contact at the FBI, Special Agent Carla Reyes, now assigned to interagency cultural property investigations. He added just 2 lines. This watch belonged to a missing journalist. Presumed dead. It just resurfaced at Gold and Silver Pawn in Vegas. Worth a closer look. Less than 2 hours later, Reyes responded. "Noted. We'll dig quietly." Within 48 hours, the FBI had begun a preliminary audit, quietly, surgically. Reyes and her team had been tracking black market antiquities for years. They'd had whispers about the U.S. being used as a final destination for looted relics, but they rarely got a clear lead. Most transactions were cloaked in forged documents, shell companies, offshore funds. But now, they had something tangible. A watch, missing since 1994, with traceable ownership, showing up in a high-profile shop. Reyes called in 2 analysts. They began with transaction records from gold and silver pawn, cross-referencing purchase dates with items that had unclear origins or no accompanying paperwork. What they found was disturbing. Between 2015 and 2023, at least 38 items had been sold through Rick Harrison's shops that matched descriptions of artifacts listed on Interpol's red list of stolen cultural property, including a Mughal ceremonial dagger, a Byzantine oil lamp, and a Phoenician funerary mask. All were featured at one point on episodes of Pawn Stars. The team dug deeper. At least 17 of those items had been flagged in internal alerts by the International Council of Museums, noting suspicious origin trails, often tied to conflict zones like Syria, Iraq, or Myanmar. Several of the artifacts had traces of soil and materials consistent with recent excavations, not private collections. On paper, Rick Harrison's operation looked legitimate, but behind the scenes, a pattern emerged. Quiet cash purchases, no receipts, delivery by anonymous couriers. Reyes requested a confidential interview with a former employee who had left the business under tense circumstances. "I'm not saying Rick was running a smuggling ring," the man said, "but sometimes stuff came in late. No cameras, no records. We'd get these estate pieces with no provenance. Rick would say, 'Don't ask, just appraise.'" By week's end, the FBI had issued a sealed warrant for full surveillance of Rick Harrison's home in Summerlin, just outside Las Vegas. They installed long-range cameras, infrared night sensors, and quietly gathered license plates of vehicles arriving late at night. What they saw stunned them. Between 1 and 4 a.m., every 3 or 4 nights, unmarked vans arrived. Blackout windows, no company logos. The same 2 or 3 men, faces obscured by hoods, unloaded metal crates, and sealed canvas bags, bringing them through a side entrance leading underground. No delivery records, no invoices, no activity on Rick's public security system. Reyes knew what this meant. Whatever was happening wasn't just about lost watches or misfiled artifacts. This was organized. This was something more. Inside the FBI's Cultural Property Database, Reyes created a new file. Subject: Richard K. Harrison. Person of interest: Tier 1. Category: International trafficking, high-value antiquities flag. Potential links to disappearances of witnesses and source contacts. And at the top of that file, pinned above all else, was the photo of a worn leather watch engraved with a message from a friend who had never made it home. It didn't take long before whispers turned into reports, and the reports became evidence. Agent Carla Reyes had overseen enough sting operations to know when something small cracked open a much bigger rot. What began with a watch had now unraveled into a pattern, a silent, sophisticated network that used celebrity, charm, and visibility as a perfect smokescreen. The gold and silver pawn shop was no back-alley black market. It was televised into American homes. It was clean, relatable, and wrapped in the voice of Rick Harrison, the everyman expert with the dry wit and the handshake deal. That made the next move delicate. If the Bureau went in loud, the media storm could warn off collaborators or force Harrison to bury the deeper layers. But too much caution risked the loss of evidence, and something told Reyes they were dealing with far more than antiquities fraud. It was one of the surveillance units posted 2 streets away from Harrison's gated home in Summerlin that recorded the first irregularity. A van, no plates, tinted windows, arrived at 2:41 a.m. and stayed for exactly 12 minutes. No one came to the front door. Instead, thermal cameras caught 3 figures slipping into a small door near the rear patio beside a ventilation duct. 2 carried crates. 1 carried what looked like a firearm. 4 nights later, it happened again. Same routine, same duration. Reyes tightened the perimeter and sent in a forensics drone disguised as a landscaping unit. It hovered near a hedge line and captured something new. The van's interior, visible for a brief moment during unloading, showed rows of cases with temperature gauges and what appeared to be molded foam cushioning, the kind used to transport fragile, priceless objects. By now, the Bureau's Cultural Crimes Division had looped in 2 external consultants, an art historian from the Getty Museum and a former Interpol analyst specializing in black market antiquities. They were shown screenshots of several artifacts obtained during the gold and silver pawn review. Both consultants confirmed at least 6 items were likely taken from war-damaged sites in Syria and northern Iraq between 2009 and 2015, including a Tang Dynasty funerary jar and an 11th century Buddhist deity statue believed to be from Laos. None of them should have been in the United States. The game changed again when Reyes finally obtained a warrant for financial records tied to Harrison's business holdings. What looked like a simple pawn empire was actually a maze of shell companies: Silver Reliquary Holdings, Antiquity Trust LLC, and 2 others registered in Cyprus and the British Virgin Islands. One company had processed $96 million in transfers in less than a year, with no declared employees and no traceable revenue stream. The transfers often coincided with dates of televised auctions or estate sales aired on the History Channel, where Harrison would joke with customers about good deals and old stories. Those good deals now looked like laundering points. Reyes briefed the Bureau's deputy director. A full tactical team was cleared for a discreet entry into the Summerlin home under the justification of national cultural security. On the morning of October 9th, just before sunrise, 38 agents executed Operation Nightvault. They expected to find smuggled artifacts. They were prepared for weapons or hidden vaults. They were not prepared for what lay beneath the house. After securing the perimeter and detaining Harrison under a sealed federal warrant, the agents moved methodically. A false panel behind the wine cellar revealed a staircase leading to a sealed, climate-controlled basement with biometric locks. Inside was not a storage room. It was a gallery. Over 140 rare and stolen artifacts sat cataloged and preserved: statues, urns, illuminated manuscripts, gold leaf icons. The room smelled faintly of cedar and dust and something else, something old and organic. In the center of the room sat a steel pedestal holding a glass dome. Inside it, the same engraved watch, the very one that Stallone had seen. A tag beside it read simply, Sarajevo, 1994. The implications were horrifying. This wasn't evidence. This was a trophy. But the true horror was still waiting. Behind the main vault, hidden behind mahogany bookshelves and pressure-latched hinges, lay a soundproof corridor. The walls narrowed. Lights flickered. At the end, a locked iron door. It took 15 minutes to breach. Inside, they found 25 bodies, some in glass coffins, some buried beneath tarp and stone. Ages ranged from early 20s to late 60s. Most showed signs of trauma, restraint, or suffocation. 5 were embalmed. Several had been reported missing over the last decade, most of them connected in some way to the antiquities trade, collectors, researchers, freelancers. One was positively identified as Rebecca Moore, a Canadian journalist known for her work uncovering illegal artifact trafficking. Another was Alvaro Jimenez, a Spanish art historian missing since 2019. The connection became painfully clear. Each had either investigated, challenged, or confronted Rick Harrison, or had tried to expose something too close to the truth. In a locked drawer beneath Harrison's private desk, agents found a leather-bound notebook, pages filled with tight, deliberate handwriting. Next to some entries were red ink marks, initials, dates, notes like "he knows too much" and "last warning failed." One line, scrawled in larger print than the rest, read, "They forget what they're worth. We remind them." That notebook, along with security footage from an isolated server, formed the backbone of the federal case. Footage included evidence of coercion, physical abuse, and at least one recorded confession made under duress. Stallone was contacted immediately. He listened to the summary report in stunned silence. The watch had been his anchor, but now it was a key in a door that revealed a nightmare. He agreed to testify, offering his first-hand account of the inscription and the friend who had vanished all those years ago. The media, once hesitant, erupted when the sealed indictment was leaked. Rick Harrison, beloved television personality, champion of American collectibles, was charged with 17 counts of first-degree murder, 11 counts of trafficking in cultural property, and multiple charges of obstruction and conspiracy. The trial was held in federal court in Nevada, under unprecedented security. Millions watched as Stallone walked into the witness box, voice steady, but eyes rimmed with sorrow. He recounted the gift, the friendship, the disappearance, the disbelief when he saw the watch in that shop. "It wasn't just a timepiece," he said. "It was a message, a breadcrumb from someone who had no other way to speak." Prosecutors unveiled the evidence piece by piece, artifacts, money trails, the bodies, the footage. Harrison sat stone-faced through most of it. But during the final cross-examination, when asked why he kept the watch labeled Sarajevo 1994, his voice cracked. Because it mattered. Because it proved control. The courtroom fell silent. And with that, a legacy built on nostalgia and public trust collapsed under the weight of its own rot. The verdict came swiftly. After just over 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous decision: guilty on all counts. The courtroom remained frozen as the judge read each charge out loud, the list stretching longer than anyone anticipated. Rick Harrison, the trusted face of American television pawn culture, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no visible emotion as the judgment was delivered, but observers would later say they saw a flicker in his eyes, not of regret, but resignation, as if he had always known the day would come. The days following the trial were chaos. The gold and silver pawn shop was shut down within 48 hours under federal seizure. Yellow tape wrapped around the gates. Crowds of tourists who had come to see the legendary shop now stood in stunned silence, snapping photos not for memorabilia, but as a way of reconciling the grotesque truth with the myth they'd believed. The History Channel released a terse statement, severing all ties and immediately pulling every episode of Pawn Stars from rotation. Streaming platforms followed suit. Hulu, Netflix, even reruns on syndicated cable vanished within a week. Rick Harrison's face, once plastered across merchandise, billboards, and rerun advertisements, had become toxic overnight. But the most devastating blows didn't come from corporations or networks. They came from the people who had trusted him. Families of the missing held vigils outside the court. Former fans expressed confusion, betrayal, and anger. Schools that once used Pawn Stars as a tool to teach history removed all references. Museums and collectors who had once partnered with Harrison issued statements of condemnation. The betrayal went beyond the crimes. It was the magnitude of deception, the calculated smile, the rehearsed authenticity, the understanding that all along Harrison had used knowledge not as a bridge to the past, but as a tool for erasure. Sylvester Stallone, back in Los Angeles, found himself caught between quiet grief and reluctant recognition. He hadn't wanted to be involved. He hadn't wanted his birthday, his memory of Jack Monroe, to become the unraveling thread. But he also knew it had to happen. When the prosecution contacted him with a copy of the sealed evidence, he sat in his study for hours, staring at a series of photographs they'd recovered from Harrison's hidden archive. In one photo, Jack sat at a cafe in Sarajevo, 1993. The original watch visible on his wrist, a date scribbled on the back. 1 year before. It was the last known image of him. It took Stallone weeks before he could look at it without his stomach nodding. The FBI's Cultural Crimes Division continued its investigation even after the conviction. New leads poured in. Testimonies from surviving victims in the black market pipeline began surfacing. People who had worked as handlers, transporters, or intermediaries. One woman, a former customs agent turned whistleblower, admitted to processing over a dozen shipments marked as estate donations that were actually stolen relics from conflict zones. Another informant, arrested in Dubai, identified Harrison as the curator, a term used in encrypted chat rooms to refer to someone who authenticated high-risk items and passed them into private hands with false provenance. The depth of the network stunned even seasoned investigators. It spanned over 13 countries, involved corrupt officials, and fed into elite collector circles willing to pay millions for untraceable history. In the months that followed, Interpol issued arrest warrants for 2 known associates, the cartographer, a falsifier of origin documents based in Rotterdam, and the Red Dome, a retired military figure turned collector believed to reside in Damascus. Though Harrison was imprisoned, the machinery he helped build was still in motion. Reyes and her team continued the dismantling piece by piece, following data trails, tracing token exchanges, and decoding phrases like black rice or Kong Mao, used to reference relics with ritualistic significance. Back in Las Vegas, the mansion in Summerlin was demolished under federal order. The underground vaults were emptied, their contents either returned to origin countries or stored in secure cultural facilities pending claims. The site would eventually become a memorial park, funded by a coalition of museums and international human rights groups. A single plaque now sits at the center of where the house once stood. It reads, "Let history tell the truth, not hide it." Stallone returned to the site one early morning under a gray sky. He walked alone, head bowed, holding a small velvet pouch. Inside it, a watch. The same watch. the one that started it all. It had been turned over to the FBI as evidence, but later released to him after the trial, officially declared personal property. He stood for several minutes thinking of Jack, of their conversations, of Sarajevo. He whispered, "You were right, my friend. Time always tells." Then gently, he placed the watch at the base of the plaque, tucked slightly behind a stone. A quiet gesture, unannounced, a closing of a circle. The story made headlines across the country. News anchors, columnists, podcasters, everyone had a take. The betrayal of America's Pawn King became a symbol for a broader disillusionment. How often, people asked, do we trust faces on screens? How many of our icons are just stories carefully constructed to distract us from the truth? Stallone, for his part, didn't do interviews. He declined book deals and refused film rights. "This one," he said to a friend, "isn't mine to dramatize. It's real, too real." But the questions lingered. What would have happened if Stallone hadn't walked into that shop? What if the watch had been sold to another collector, lost again in the shuffle of the marketplace? And more chilling still, how many other relics, lives or truths, remained buried under fame, charisma, and expertly staged history? In the end, the case of Rick Harrison didn't just expose a criminal empire. It forced the country to ask what we let ourselves believe and why. The court documents, declassified in early 2025, included transcripts from Harrison's private journals. In one entry, he wrote, "People don't want history. They want the version that flatters them, that entertains, that keeps them comfortable." Another read, "Truth is messy, so I clean it." He was not just trafficking relics. He was editing the past, silencing what didn't fit the narrative, eliminating what threatened the illusion. And yet, even monsters leave cracks in their masks. The dead man's watch, in the end, had done more than track time. It had outlasted its owner, crossed borders, survived lies, and exposed something far larger than any artifact. It reminded everyone that truth, however buried, however hidden, has a way of resurfacing. And for Sylvester Stallone, for Jack Monroe, for the victims unnamed and unseen, the watch became what it was always meant to be: a signal, a beginning, and at last, an end.